Now, this week saw the official launch of the Yes campaign for an Indigenous voice to Parliament. Yesterday, Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Linda Burney, was at an event in Melbourne at the invitation of the Independent Senator Zoe Daniel. Miss Burney told Weekend Breakfast yesterday that the government wants to engage with all sides of politics.
The work towards a positive referendum, of course, is being guided by a First Nations working group, an engagement group. But I want to reach out across the Parliament to make sure everyone's involved and clear on what we're really talking about.
Linda Burney there talking on Weekend Breakfast. But while the government says it welcomes all views, not everyone is convinced voicing their opposition to the referendum would be met with consideration. Well, Dan Borsche is the ABC's Voice referendum correspondent. He joins us now from Canberra. So odd to be talking to you from across the screen here, Dan, when you're usually here in the studio with us. But welcome and thank you so much for chatting with us on Weekend Breakfast.
Good to be with you, Fauziah.
So, you know, Dan, there is a range of perspective from the no camp when it comes to this referendum. Take us through some of the concerns, their concerns over this referendum.
Well, Fauziah, we've certainly heard that in the last couple of days that the No campaign and the very many different views within that are diverse and varied and often quite layered. There are some who say that there needs to be a focus on treaty first, that sovereignty and black sovereignty that we heard from former Green Senator and now Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe speaking about. She also did an interview this week on Radio National where she talked about the progressive no case and she said they need to be heard. That's progressive voters who are also going to vote no because they're not certain about what sort of impact it will have. There are also, Fauziah, a whole range of people from the Nationals and others that say that this won't lead to tangible outcomes, that the Voice to Parliament wouldn't see a change in the closing the gap targets. In fact, that was one of the reasons why the Nationals Party decided that they would not campaign for it and in fact would campaign for a no case when they announced that several months ago. So there is a real broad scope of why people are talking about no. And I think one of the important things here, Fauziah, is that there have been some in politics and the media commentariat who are seeming to indicate that there should be a singular view within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, which is just extraordinary given that that's not something that's put on anyone else in the Australian community, and that this is actually a chance to have a bigger conversation about who we are right now.
You were in Adelaide, Dan, to cover the launch of the Yes campaign. But what's happening with the No campaign? As you say, there isn't a homogenous no, not just within the First Nations groups, but also just across the board. Where is it the most strongest?
Yeah, well, you're right. I was in Adelaide earlier this week at Tandanya for the Yes campaign launch, and as soon as the No campaign launches as well, or they identify if and when that'll happen, we'll be there covering that as well. And really this week, the No campaign was centred around Western Australia. And we know from some of the polling there that it's around, if not under, 50% support mark. Now, as most people that have been talking about referendums know, you need the double majority. So you need a majority of Australians and a majority of Australians in a majority of states to vote yes for the referendum, for the change, the sequence of words that the Prime Minister put forward. So that was certainly somewhere that the No campaign was focusing on. And you'd have to think, Fauziah, that Western Australia is really emerging as one of the key focal points, because just in this last week we saw the Prime Minister there, senior members of Cabinet. There was a Cabinet meeting held there as well. Also the opposition spending a lot of time in Western Australia. So that's certainly seeming to be one of the key places where this debate is going to centre over the year ahead.
Dan, we heard a little earlier there, Linda Burney saying that all views and perspectives are welcome. There will, however, be those who are concerned about voicing opposition or even hesitation about changing the Constitution or even indeed, establishing an Indigenous voice to Parliament. Do you think they will be portrayed in a negative light?
Well, we're already seeing that happening in some instances, and when people ask questions, there are some that are shooting that down and saying that is an indication of racism. Well, that was certainly the point, I think, that Linda Burney, the Minister for Indigenous Australians, was trying to counter yesterday. When you were talking to her and you asked her about those who have those different views, she was very generous in saying, actually, that we need to bring everyone in, and perhaps it's not generosity at all. Perhaps it's actually just about having this big debate. And that's a question that I asked earlier this week to Dean Parkin, who's the campaign lead from the Heart campaign. And he said now is the time to be asking questions and having those big conversations and coming together and really talking through that. And in fact, I was speaking to Warren Mundine just yesterday, who's the president of Recognise a Better Way. And he was telling me he's also quite worried about this becoming divisive, and vitriolic was the term that he used. He says that this is a chance where we need to be able to really talk about the policy and the structures and the structural reform that's being debated here, and not the personal attacks. So it would appear that that's certainly a point that's being made at all sides of the campaign, Fauziah, and it's probably something that the politicians and those leading the campaigns want to remind all Australians that this is actually a public debate where we have an opportunity to have a conversation about, a bigger conversation about who we are right now.
All right, Dan, in the weeks to come, what can we expect from both the Yes and the No campaign?
Well, we know that those committees that are advising Linda Burney, the Minister, as well as Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, were meant to be meeting tomorrow because of travel that's been put off for a couple of weeks. They're really deciding on the final sequence of wording. And once that's decided, we understand that there'll be a bill brought before Parliament, likely towards the end of March. So that's from the government perspective. We know that we are wrapping up now, coming to the end of this week of action from the Yes campaign, and that they want to start hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations across the nation over the coming year. So that'll really continue. And certainly in Adelaide this week, there was a focus on volunteers and around the messaging of campaigning as those people go back to their communities across Australia. On the No side, I understand that many of the volunteers are going to be coming together likely this coming week and the following week, and that they're going to be doing something quite similar, talking about how they campaign and how they have that focus. I understand that next month, so into March and across April, that Warren Mundine and Country Liberal Party Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price will be heading out and doing a bit of a tour around Australia and having conversations and going to barbecues and meetings and having really articulating why they say that this is not the right way ahead, keeping in mind that Recognise a Better Way is saying that the polling that they're getting about constitutional enshrinement is at around 90%, is very, very high. Warren Mundine was telling me that the real pressure point is around the voice component of that. So he was saying he was really heartened by those numbers, indicating that Australians are overwhelmingly supportive of constitutional enshrinement, of recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but it's the voice point that is being the biggest contention that he's seeing in that polling.
Right, Dan, great talking to you, and thank you so much for taking us through those issues. Dan Borsha there, the ABC's Voice referendum correspondent.